Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. A very good morning to everyone. Let's begin with our sessions with Surah Al-Fatiha for the Muslim and a moment of silence to the others. First and foremost, I would like to welcome everyone to this our first webinar on DOF, Dialogue on Value-Based Educations. This is a conference that is a seminar that is collaborations between International Islamic Universities and Higher Education Leadership Academy, which have been planned initially to be a physical conference, but due to the current pandemic, it became a trend that everything moved to online. But Alhamdulillah, thank God, we managed to make it through with an interesting list of speakers. And as an update, we've got almost 350 participants registered. And inshallah, today we'll have very good, interesting discussions. I'll be the MC, just a host, before I pass these sessions to Prof. Nordin as a welcome remark, and then to Dr. Lihana. A bit of a background so that everyone will be standing on the common context of the discussions today. This series of seminar, this is series of DOF, is consisting of 3 sessions, which we will start with today with the first series that will be looking at mainstreaming value-based education universities leadership and management perspective. And then will be followed on the 15th and on the 22nd. Yeah. As for today, this is the flow that we hopefully can run this as smooth as possible. Try to avoid any technical glitch. This is what will happen today. Yeah? The first later on that we would like to, we will have the welcome remarks by the Higher Education Leadership Academy, and then we'll have the speaker, yeah, according to what we have scheduled, yeah. And then there will be no Q&A at the moment until we'll bring it forward at the dialogue sessions, yeah. Just to give a bit of background of expected participants, we are looking forward to have like at least 14-15 countries joining us from diverse level of society. We've got people from, of course, from public universities and then private universities, and then from government ministries as well, from in-country and out-country, and also NGOs, I suppose, yeah, will be joining us. And this is a breakdown just to give a feel of international perspective that hopefully to come in. Just quickly, the etiquette of this online to make sure that we have the least disruptions or distractions. Just to remind that everyone to be muted, to mute their mic, to avoid any distractions, and at the same time this session will be live streamed through YouTube as well. If you have any questions, you can give that questions at the chat box, or you can give the questions or put up the questions through Q&A email that we send to you. Yeah? So without further ado, now I would like to kindly invite our co-organizer, yeah, for the seminar, Professor Nordin Yahya, the Director, Higher Education Leadership Academy, or in Malay it's known as AKEPT. So please, Prof, the floor, the online is yours.
Thank you, Professor Zainal Abidin Sausi, the MC for our program today. Yang berbahagia, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato' Zulkifli Razak, Director of National Islamic University Malaysia, IUM, Professor Dr. Karim Alias, Director Center for Development of Academic Excellence, CDAE, University Science Malaysia, Dr. James Campbell, Head of Asia Aware Institute AAI, Associate Professor Dr. Lihana Burhan from IUM, who will be the moderator for our panel session today, Chairman of the University Board, VCs, the senior management of the university, and all participants from Malaysia and abroad. Salam Sejahtera and good morning. On behalf of AKEPT, the main organizer of this conference, together with IUM, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all participants of the AKEPT Talk, Dialogue on Values-Based Education, DOVE Series 1, entitled Mainstreaming Values-Based Education in Universities, Leadership and Management Perspective. As mentioned by Prof. Zainal, this is the first talk in the series of 3 programs lined up together with the theme on values-based education, Series 2 and Series 3 under DOVE theme. The detail will be announced later today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank International Islamic University Malaysia, IUM, as AKEPT's strategic partner in making this talk series a success. Thank you to IUM Sejahtera Center for Sustainability and Humanity, headed by Professor Dr. Zainal Abidin Sanusi as the IUM's focal person on this AKEPT IUM strategic collaboration. To those from abroad or new to Malaysia higher education scenario, AKEPT is one of the divisions under the Ministry of Higher Education Malaysia that focuses on identifying, compiling, profiling, developing and sustaining the leadership talent pool for higher education institutions in Malaysia. We have been established since 2008 and we currently based in Bandar Estek Nilai, about 40 minutes from Putrajaya. The AKEPT Talk is a series of intellectual discourses organized by AKEPT since 2016. It aims to provide a platform for leaders and potential leaders from higher education institutions in Malaysia, and now we also are expanding to international institutions, to be exposed to the practices and values of leadership so as to nurture them into successful leaders in the academia. Through this talk series, participants will gain knowledge on academic leadership, academic management, and institutional leadership from renowned experts and practitioners. Among the issues addressed in previous programs of talk series of this nature include the evolution of universities, the past, present, and future roles of university leadership, building unity of Malaysian higher education community, solution in raising the quality of higher education institutions, and recently we talked about entering the new realm of international higher education, among others. The structure of the talk series varied from keynote addresses. Sometimes we have Minister of Education or prominent people from higher education industry, talk shows to panel sessions. However, this is our second webinar edition of the talk series. This is one of the changes that we have to implement because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Otherwise, all of us will come to one big seminar hall to listen to this panel session. Today, we have 3 panelists who will start our dialogue on values-based education, or DOVE, according to their perspectives, and later we'll have further conversation around this topic during question and answer session. We have 3 speakers: Dr. James Campbell, who is the head of Asia Aware Institute, or AAI. We'll talk about the roles and models of values-based education, lesson from history and contemporary approach. We have Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, who will talk about IUM experiences in formulating and implementing values-based education. And we also have Professor Abdul Karim Alias, a well-known authority in educational technology in Malaysia, with his vast experience as the Director, Center for Development of Academic Excellence at University of Science Malaysia, who will talk about values-based education in virtual era issues and challenges. It's based on our current experiences in executing effective and meaningful learning and teaching in the era of COVID-19. The session will be moderated by Associate Professor Dr. Lihana Borhan from IUM, who is currently the Director for Office of Knowledge and Change and Advancement. Thank you, Dr. Lihana. Ladies and gentlemen, education is a unique quality of humankind. It is education that makes human beings to act their part in this world successfully. Education and higher education, for that matter, is very important condition for the development of the holistic man or wholesome man, and an important vehicle for accelerating the prosperity and well-being of humankind in all directions. Education is a lifelong process which continues from womb to tomb. Education has many different meanings and definitions for different people. The parents, the teachers, the professors, all the stakeholders, the rural people, the housewives, students, the community, the business people, the religious people, politicians, etc., interpret their term for their own ways. Hence, the meaning of education and higher education included is complex in nature. From whatever perspective and definition, the ultimate aim of education is nourishing, is developing a socially acceptable and balanced personality, citizen for the nation and for the whole world. In Malaysia, we have embedded the philosophy of education in our Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan or National Education Philosophy. I'm sure Tan Rizal will talk a lot about this. Here comes the importance of value education, which is inseparable from education. Such an education consists of man-making and character-building program, training of body, mind and soul, quest for integrating culture and technology, the hunt for goal which liberates men from fear, inertia, and ignorance. So the real education should combine science and ethics. It should cut across all narrow barriers and help humans to reach their destiny, which is the greatness of intellect and the soul, the humbleness of soul. Now we have the nobility or greatness of intellect that help men to explore the outer space, to split atom, to combat the diseases, operate human brain, and so many other wonders. But human being needs the humility of soul as well to live together on this planet. And I'm sure a lot of this will be addressed in this session. It is the responsibility of the drivers of educational institutions and policy makers to ensure that the true north or the higher mission of education goals can be achieved. So through this program, we believe the participant will gain crucial understanding, leadership competencies and skills, while exploring different perspectives so that we can understand all the required changes and transformation needed in our institutions. In this series, in the first series, we hope that we'll be able to discuss the current scenario, how, for example, the economic-driven education industry nowadays. Sometimes we have a metric such as graduate employability comes to the picture. How has this influenced the roles and the shapes of current universities? We probably will share our experiences of different practices of humanizing universities around the world, around the globe. We try to understand the synergies between science, technology, and humanities. And hopefully during our conversation, we have a lot of experienced people on our panel, and as well as from the audience, so that we'll be able to discuss about how to go about different practices of integrating sustainable development agenda into universities program, for example. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope at the end of this program, participants will gain invaluable knowledge to cope with the challenges of leading institutions. Many of us are leaders of their own right, of different roles. It is hoped that the insights gained through this program shape the thought process of participants, which could then be used to drive sustainable growth of higher education institutions, particularly in today's ever-changing higher education landscape. With that, I would like to wish all participants every success and hope the learning experience for this program will further enhance our knowledge and leadership ability. Thank you again, IUM and Professor Tansi Zul Razak, especially IUM Sejahtera Center for co-organizing this program together with AKEPT. I wish all of you the very best. We are all on this together. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nordin, for a very interesting and insights from expectations and objective of the conference, highlighting several issues that we are expecting to address. Without further ado again, while we get Dr. James to be prepared for the presentations. So the next sessions, I will pass the floor to our moderator, Dr. Lihana. So Dr. Lihana, are you ready to take up these discussions forward?
Yes. All right.
Yes, please.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Zainal. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning, Malaysian time. Okay. Again, let me reiterate. Welcome to the first of the DOPE series, which is the dialogue on values-based education, and a program jointly organized by Akademi Kepimpinan Pendidikan Tinggi, AKEPT, Kementerian Pendidikan Tinggi Malaysia, KPT, and also International Islamic University Malaysia, which is aimed at promoting holistic excellence in educational leadership and management, focusing on an element that is essential yet not highly visible, values. And I'm very excited to moderate this first series, which brings us three distinguished speakers in the area: Dr. James Campbell from Asia Aware Institute, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Zulkifli Abdul Razak from IIUM, and Professor Dr. Abdul Karim Alias from USM, who will be speaking on to this topic: mainstreaming values-based education in universities, leadership and management perspectives. Okay, a little preamble here, just to get us on the same page for today's topic. Education nowadays has been shaped and geared towards responding to the demand from the industry and inevitably transformed them into economy-driven institutions. This phenomenon has raised concerns among many in the academia, since the education system now is very much about ranking games, racing towards completing writing and publication just to be published in a highly reputable journal, but with questionable real impact to society. Therefore, there is an urgent need for a paradigm change in university leadership towards humanizing the education system back to be grounded on a strong value system as to how universities are supposed to be. Okay, in pushing this agenda, the national education philosophy can serve as a mere reference to restore the spirit and principles at every level of education in Malaysia, from primary to lifelong education programs. Okay, and so the three speakers that we have today will bring us to this topic based on that separate topics. So allow me to explain the flow of today's program. Each speaker will be given 30 minutes to talk about his specific topic. And during this time, participants may submit questions via the chat panel, both through Zoom or YouTube. Okay, we will do the Q&A after all speakers have shared their thoughts. I will only introduce the speakers. I won't read off the impressive bio. I will never get to that talk. And I believe AKEPT has their bio available should anyone be interested in getting the details. Are we ready, Dr. James? Dr. Campbell? James? Are we ready to go?
Me?
Yeah, okay. Let me introduce you first then. Okay, just a short introduction. Okay. Our first speaker is Dr. James Campbell from Australia. Besides his native Australia, James has worked in South Korea and in Malaysia, working not just with USM, but also other agencies. Having worked in a myriad of capacities as student advisor, as a university academic, and also management consultant, to rattle off just a few, he's well positioned to discuss today's topic, focusing on the roles and models of values-based education, lessons from history and contemporary approach. James, the screen is yours.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Selamat pagi. Good morning from Melbourne, Australia. Wave if you can hear me, because I could see all of you. Great, fantastic. So good morning. I should do this thing. Now, I've sent some slides, and I'm assuming the slide share aspect on Zoom is not here, so I'm assuming that you can see the slides and that someone is helping me with that. However, if it's not the case, that's fine as well. Since I only have 30 minutes to talk, I guess I better get into it. Since, as usual with myself, and I suspect with all of you, I always over-prepare. Now, I was given a rather broad topic, the roles and models of value-based education, lessons from history and contemporary approaches. And when I first got that, I thought, oh my, how do I approach a topic like that? That's kind of asking me for the history of everything. So what I decided to do was to focus on what I had some reasonable ability in and what I thought you might find interesting. So let's begin. It seems to me that discussions about values education in higher education is necessarily informed by context and by history. Values and models occur in different historical periods and social contexts. And so education has always concerned itself with the issue of values to be transmitted to those members of the educational institutions. Now, the problem is when we talk about values education, of course, is that we're not quite sure what it is we're discussing. For example, we can talk about moral education, character education, ethics education. And whilst people tend to use these terms in a sense synonymously with values education, often writers who write in these domains are discussing them in different ways. They're not necessarily discussing them all in the same way. Each variant of these, of the variants that I've referred to, can have a slightly different meaning, pointing to one or other distinctive emphasis. Overriding, however, these differences is a common theme, I think. There is a growing belief that the issue of values is of increasing importance and is a legitimately and increasingly important role for teachers, universities, educational institutions generally to play. The international research on teaching, for example, teaching in schooling and teaching in universities, university teaching, is now starting to reinforce this idea that values are not something that are tangential to our institutions, but are in fact central to them. Why has there been an increase in the desire of people to engage with values education? Because there has been in the last 20 or 30 years. I think there's three separable but relatable concerns behind the push for values education. The first concern is a kind of concern with the way in which cultural pluralism, liberal individualism, and the growing divisions in society are calling for a engagement with values and morals. There is a sense that liberal individualism and I guess a kind of social disintegration that many people see around them is driving a sense of the importance of values education. A second reason concerns, and it's related to the first, concerns what people consider to be a breakdown of traditional mores, of traditional values under the influence of things such as consumerism, individualism, and so forth. There is a concern both in the developed world and the developing world with the kind of breakdown of discipline amongst the young, a breakdown of social solidarity amongst everyone. Perhaps if we look today at the current crisis that we see in the US, many people would see this crisis as a kind of example A this thesis. The third reason why values education is becoming more salient is that there is a professional concern in regards to and a political concern in regards to the economic role of education, but people are now concerned that what that's done is crowded out the moral benefits of education. In other words, the emphasis on the economic side of getting a job and so forth, of competing in the labour market, according to some, has crowded out the more moral and ethical dimensions to education. So I think it's important to understand that this is a debate that when people use phrases, they're not necessarily talking about the same thing. They use them coming from different traditions, different historical contexts. And also it's important to understand that that there are diverse reasons that this issue of values education is becoming more and more front and center in terms of educational discourse. Now, some of the major questions that values education poses can be stated thus. What is to be understood by the term values education? And I've kind of touched on that before. What are the objectives of values education? What values, secular and non-secular, should form the content of values education? What institutions are to be responsible for establishing values and for inculcating them? Indeed, what age cohorts, social groups are most likely to be influenced or not influenced by values education? If education is a primary vehicle of socialization, what aspects of schooling, as between, for example, the formal curriculum, the school or university ethos, the administrative structure, or other elements are most important when we talk about values education? Values education, in other words, is actually a controversial and widely debated subject. There are many aspects of the topic that are disputed in both theory and practice, including, as I've said, the meaning of the term itself. It is widely, I think, agreed that a university cannot be a values-free environment, nor can any educational institution, and that university workers, teachers, administrators are inevitably involved in the conveyance and development of values. And there is a lot of deliberation over the roles that they ought to play, the challenges that they have. There is dispute over exactly what educational institutions should be teaching students about values and morality. And there is also dispute about their role in doing that. Other areas of contention, evidenced by the literature reviewed, include the nature and variety of values education models and the issue of which models are best. Types of approaches. In the literature, we find a plethora of approaches. Many of the distinctions between approaches relate to different cultural, national histories, to religious, secular divisions, and so forth. A broad distinction can be drawn between values education, seen as values clarification, and values instruction. However, this broad distinction is also quite simplistic. Another distinction is between debates about values education that typically focus on character education or cognitive development. While the potential scope of values education is broad, some teachers focus primarily on those values guiding the relationship of individuals to the state, what is called civic education. Others place a greater emphasis on interpersonal or moral and individual values. So why values education? I want to go back and look a little bit at the sociology and the philosophy of this. Essentially, in many modern societies, we get a sense that, firstly, that private life is becoming increasingly fragmented. People are becoming more individualistic, and there's a growth of social isolation. This can be accelerated and, on the other hand, ameliorated, depending on one's point of view, when one looks, for example, at the impact of technology. Mediating institutions by that I mean universities and schools and so forth, can act to temper, to socialize us, and provide a kind of balance between the private individual and the broader and bigger, often alienating structures of society. Understanding the importance of these mediating structures, educational institutions, in the social and moral development of citizens, and the important role that our institutions, our educational institutions as communities, can play in providing forms of what we call social and normative stabilization in a world that is characterized by subjectification and individualization, and in a world where there is growing distrust between people, growing conflict between people, values education and the role of universities and the role of other educational institutions in this is quite critical, and increasingly so. And so what we find in modernity, as it were, or certainly what we find in many societies that claim to be advanced, and you'll notice my emphasis there, that claim to be advanced, what you'll find is that there is a growing sense of social fragmentation, a growing sense of, if you will, social breakdown. And so values education is a critical issue in regards to this. Now, just briefly, what are some of these external drivers that actually impact on values education? Some of the kind of external things that are having an impact and really destabilizing us in terms of our values and in terms of what we think we ought to be doing in universities. Economic change, obviously, is one of them. ICT, communications technology, clearly another. Obviously, government policy and the shifting politics of government policy has a huge effect. Social diversity, cultural complexity, demographic trends, consumer, the extension of consumerization, and also the challenges of sustainable development. We live in a world where we can no longer simply just consume and destroy the environment at will. We have to take seriously the issues of sustainable development if we're going to have a world in which we can live. The culture of educational institutions influences the success or failure of values education. So the patterns of belief and assumptions of the staff, that the staff share about an institution, what is proper in the school or university and the teacher's place in it, what is correct and right to do. Often the values of teachers are held implicitly, sometimes unconsciously, and often these values can be the most important ones. The culture of a university gives its members cues on what is truly important or valued in a school or university, either explicitly or implicitly. And this is also very important. So what I want to do, what I'm trying to do, and you'll notice, is that I'm trying to look at, and I'll hit this point again and again, I'm trying to look at values education not simply as something that just happens in a classroom, not simply as something that is just taught in Values Education 101, but is actually something that is far more socially embedded and when we're talking about universities, for example, or higher education, is socially embedded not just in what happens in the classroom, but also in the broader culture, the broader codes of conduct, the broader behaviors of all the members of those institutions. So it's critical to understand this, because I think often when we look at what some of us think of as the failure of us to inculcate what we perceive as proper values, or the failure of our students to take up and to realize those values in society, part of the problem is that we tend to reduce our understanding of values education just to a kind of or we can tend to reduce it in to a kind of values 101, and then wonder why people immediately upon leaving the subject just proceed to completely act in ways that are contrary to what we thought they'd learned. Okay, I've divided values into 3 orders, and this is an oversimplification. What I have is the meta order of morals, core core rules, beliefs, statements of fundamental right and wrong. That can come from religion or it can come from other forms, but they often form the meta order, the overarching canopy of values, the moral rules. You know, in my culture, it's the 10 Commandments, for example. We have what we call the mediating order. I've talked about that a little bit. Universities, institutions, organizations. And here we have institutional conventions, expectations, cultures, codes, the kinds of things that characterize, the kinds of habits and rules and culture that characterize specific institutions, in our case, universities. And then under that, we have what I've termed local order. Day-to-day habits and manners of individuals. These are the things that occur in families. They express themselves in day-to-day. The way you purchase a product, yes, thanks, no thanks, the use of politeness and manners. These are the three levels that values exist in our society: the meta order, the mediating order of the university, and the local everyday order. And it's important, the reason, as you can see, the emphasis of my discussion here, it's important for us to understand when we talk about models of values education, we have to understand it in terms of a social analysis, a philosophical analysis, and a historical analysis. And this, at the moment, I'm focusing on a social institutional analysis. I've talked before about the fear of society, of this fear of people losing their sense of balance, sense of moral anchor or moral compass. And for those of you who have a social theory background, you'll notice that there's a certain Durkheimian tendency in my thinking, and it comes through, and you'll see it coming through here on this little slide here. In societies that have a strong normative integration, strong binding moral norms and so forth, what you find is that the binding canopy of moral precepts, moral doctrine, rules, it could be religious rules and so forth, are quite strong. You find that this is integrated in a sense and manifests either often implicitly, sometimes explicitly, with institutional norms, codes and practices. So for example, in the university, you find that that the university's codes, its practices, the way people behave in that university has some relationship, is in keeping with. I don't mean in some blind following, in some robotic sense, but I do mean in a general sense, it tends to be in keeping with these norms. And furthermore, in the day-to-day habits of people, family, social relations and manners, in these habits, you find that these habits and manners are also, they find they are normatively integrated. They are in keeping with, or at least coherent with those other two levels. In a society where you find normative and social disintegration, you find a kind of moralism, where morals are reduced to slogans, in some case simply politicized slogans, things that people shout a lot about, but don't seem to affect them on their day-to-day lives. You see a lack of coherence between, if there are moral precepts in a society, and the culture of an organization, what some people call organizational hypocrisy. You know, whenever you hear someone say, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do in theory, but in practice, look what happens. There you see a breakdown where the organization is not actually in keeping with those moral precepts. So for example, if you were in an organization that had a strong religious sensibility, that was a strong sense of religious mission, if you found that the day-to-day codes and practices and behaviors of people in that organization were at odds with the practices, the moral doctrines of the religion, which is supposed to guide the organization, then you can see that there's a lack of coherence. Furthermore, at the everyday life of the individual, when you see a breakdown of manners, of everyday habits that frame moral relations, you see a deinstitutionalization, a social atomization, a collapse of basic manners and understandings. In that kind of society, if institutions function in that kind of frame, then you see a what we call a breakdown in values. Perhaps if I use a Malaysian example, or to use the Malaysian terminology, when you see a breakdown of what many people refer to as adab, of basic fundamental pious manners in a society, when you see a breakdown of this, then what you're seeing is a society where you're getting a certain kind of values disintegration. And so when you have debates about, for example, adab, or the breakdown of manners, or the breakdown of values in a society, what you're having is a debate that can be understood in very broad terms by the way I've theorized it there. Okay. So when there is disintegration of the relationship between daily habits, the practices of mediating institutional code, university practices and so forth, and the formal moral precepts that provide a moral canopy to a society, then we witness what we call normative disintegration as opposed to normative integration. Now, the thing is that values education is not simply, and I'll repeat this point several times, is not simply a cognitive issue in the sense that it's not simply something that one learns a bunch of rules and then, you know, simply says, okay, I've learnt that, I move on. Values education has a practical and effective component to it as well. It has a cognitive, a practical and effective opponent. So approaching the problem of values through a focus on institutions and practices, as I've just outlined, provides some footing, some grounding for our understanding of how values function, actually work, and enables us to focus on the specific cultural and institutional context within which values education occurs. Now, this goes back to the original point I made, that in fact there are different cultural and historical traditions, religious traditions that are important in understanding, if we're to understand discussions about values education in specific context. The focus on institutions and practices and the ways in which ethical identity and so forth are framed, bounded and articulated in reference to binding institutions and authoritative practices suggests that our understanding of moral and values education is not simply a problem of teaching people to repeat or understand certain things, but also involves changes in actual practice, and it also has an effect on one's emotional state. It has an effect on one's affectivity. So what am I trying to say? Well, what I'm trying to say is Morals 101 is not good enough in terms of values education. I'm trying to say that just having one subject that we're teaching values, this is it, this is morals education, Morals 101 is not good enough. And let me say it simply, and I have taken a rather combative tone here in my presentation, I do admit. Often what you find is that a student can go through a subject, do moral education or values education or ethics 101, and what they do is they do the test, they're tested on it, and then you find when you talk to people, they say, oh yeah, I've done that. I've done morals at 101, done and dusted. No need to go through all that again. So I think we need to see values education as broader than just something that's taught in a particular subject. That's my point. Values education is not simply an issue of individual knowledge abstracted from social practices. Values education cannot be abstracted from the needs of the broader social and normative integration in a society. The challenge of values education in higher education is critically a challenge of revitalizing the social and moral dimension to learning and recognizing that our character is developed not just in what we think, but in how we act and how we relate to each other. We cannot, in my view, neatly separate the moral issues of character and the formation of moral personality at an individual level from our deeper concerns of what we deem to be a good society and the kinds of relationships we have in that society and in that educational institution. The quality of the institution is critical. The quality of our universities, of our schools, of all of our institutions is critical. Forming strong institutions dedicated to the development of what we call thick educational and moral outcomes requires, in my view, for us to grasp our vulnerable characteristics as human beings. And this requires us to grasp the serious attention to our education. We are vulnerable because we can be influenced by many of the strong forces of individualism, consumerism, greed, avarice, and so forth. Our educational institutions can provide a stable background for the development of character, okay, and provide a stable background so that we can develop and form and reform character, so that people can deal with a world where you know where there is much anxiety, manipulation, and so forth. The role that these mediating structures, universities, have in trying to generate shared values and normative and binding sense of their members is a critical role that they, and a critical contribution that they play, not just to the moral anchor, the moral compass of individuals, but to the society as a whole. Universities are places that inculcate habits of conduct and dispositions amongst their students. The idea, once we understand the university as a mediating structure, we can understand the idea of values education as building a positive and binding moral ecology within which students can operate and within which we can all learn. In an environment where the moral order of so-called private life is breaking down, the role that our mediating institutions, universities, can play in attempting to reintegrate people back into a sense of moral community, if you will, should not be underestimated. This is an extremely critical role. In fact, for me, it is the central mission of a university. It is the central mission, not a tangential mission, not a mission just for window dressing, not a mission just for branding, and definitely not something that is answered just in a one semester subject that's quickly forgotten. It is a central issue for universities. And I know I'm belaboring the point, but my aim really in this talk was to hit this nail on the head as many times as I could. So at the core, what kind of practice or exercise is values education? Well, here's my concluding argument, and I've got 5 minutes to make it. I'm drawing from, for those of you who've following my argument here, I'm drawing from multiple sources. And what I want to suggest here, and here I'm going out on a limb, I want to suggest a model of values education as a kind of spiritual exercise. Since values education aims at realizing a transformation of one's vision of the world, an improvement, right? The exercise of values education has an existential value. It's not just simply an instrumental thing. What does this mean? It means that values education does not only try to ensure that behavior is in accordance with a good code of conduct, which is important, but it involves all aspects of one's being, the intellect, the imagination, sensibility, will, our practices, and so forth. What am I trying to say? Values education aims to form as well as to inform. It aims to form character, not simply inform character. Yes, inform character, but forming it is critical. Understood as a spiritual exercise, values education prevents the moral dialogue in a classroom, for example, of being simply theoretical or dogmatic, and forces it to be a concrete and practical exercise. It is not simply concerned with the exposition of doctrines or a set of rules per se, although that can be important, but with guiding an interlocutor, with guiding students into a certain mental, practical, and emotional attitude. The reduction of values simply to a discourse or to simply forms of clarification, in many cases are purely theoretical and abstract, activity means that values education doesn't connect to us as a way of life. And ultimately, as a spiritual exercise, values education is about changing our way of life, how we engage with people, what we do. It's not just about us being able to repeat a set of moral norms. It's about us becoming better people. You know, philosophically, we talk of changing the heart, of informing the heart. This is extremely important from my perspective, for what it's worth. The teaching of values in the modern university can sometimes obscure the difference between a values discourse and values as a way of life. This can occur because values education can sometimes be simply seen as a discrete subject to be completed, rather than a continual practice of self-transformation, formation, and human betterment. The extent to which values are not thought of as central to our kind of life, but rather a subject to be done, passed and then forgotten, is the extent to which values education can be stripped, can be hollowed out of its genuine purpose and its importance. Values education as a spiritual exercise connects values back to tradition, it connects values back to our heart, if you will, and it ensures that we continually think of values education not just as a subject to be learnt, but as a path to human betterment and social improvement. Terima kasih. Thank you all for listening, and I hope that I haven't been too theoretical or too abstract. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Okay, a lot of food for thought there. Yes, okay. While we let others and me digest, let me, you mentioned something about the culture of education, culture of educational institutions, and IIUM may proclaim itself, may proclaim its values. With the name that we have, International Islamic University Malaysia is there, okay? But actually other Malaysian universities also do inculcate these values in the academic program, for us who are involved, and most of us are in the development of academic programs, we know that the Malaysian qualification framework has that when we fill up our, our MQE 01, MQE 02, okay? So this is just something for us to think about. Are we practicing institutional hypocrisy instead? I don't know. I mean, this is something for us to, this one, are we doing simply moral 101 as what James said? Okay, so let's, I would like us to just keep this in mind, okay, all of us participants here, to keep this in mind as we listen to the next speaker, okay, who will be my boss, okay? All right, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Zulkifli Abdul Razak. Everybody here knows that his cult leadership framework is something that we should be familiar with. And also we should also, if we have been reading what he has been writing weekly for the past 25 years in the newspapers, we know his passion for educational excellence at all levels. So he is also well respected both in Malaysia and internationally. He was once the president of International Association of Universities, an association affiliated with UNESCO. Currently, he is director of International Islamic University Malaysia. So I think he is very much there to talk us through whether we are practicing institutional organizational hypocrisy or not, or if not, how do we do this? How do we avoid ourselves from this kind of things? Okay, so let's hear his talk today, focusing on values-based higher education, the IIUM experiences. So, Tan Sri, bring on, tafadhal mashkuran.
Okay, thank you very much, Liana. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greeting of peace and a very good morning. Thank you all, James. Nice to see you again, and Karim. to discuss something that we've been discussing for quite a long time. And I'm really very honored to be part of this panel, particularly after listening to James' very profound sort of presentation. I am very happy that you end up with something that I can relate to, particularly your last slides that talk about it is a kind of a spiritual exercise. Yeah, we probably try to demonstrate that it is a way of life, and it is to form more than just to inform. So all these things, I think we have been grappling with it. And what I try to do perhaps is to demonstrate some of these issues that we have been doing in this university, bearing in mind that I've been here less than 2 years. So I'll go back and see how we can actually relate to some of the things that James said and try to demonstrate it, whether there is something that we have arrived in the context of value-based education. Okay, I have tweaked my title a little bit. Since we are talking about COVID and the coronavirus, I'll try to put it in that context so that we can probably relate to what we are trying to do now and even post-COVID as it were. So the title that was given to us is Mainstreaming Value-Based Education, Leadership and Management Perspective. And my subtext on this will be on what is the IIUM post-COVID-19 initiative, talking about where do we place a value-based education as we move forward, right? Let me start by giving my own perspective of what education is all about. I'm just using this word pro-COVID, pre-COVID, in the sense that things in the past, in the 21st century, and even before that, when we look at education arising from the Industrial Revolution, maybe 300 years ago, to my mind, it is no doubt is almost like a factory model, all right? Everybody else is going through a kind of a mass production with the 3 M's in mind. One is to produce manpower. I think that Dr. Nordin has talked about this, and Malaysia is talking about employment, employability, and all over the world, I think we are talking about that now, given the COVID sort of predicament that we are facing. Training our minds, and also basically working with machines. What does it mean in terms, we're talking about employment? I think that it would be the kind of a basis that we want to run education. Everybody asks, at the end of the day, will I be employed? If you're employed, you're okay. The level of employment, sometimes even if it's not discussed, yeah? As long as you got an employment, whether it's underemployment, it's okay. That will be a kind of what you call evaluation, whether we are successful. We talk about innovation, creativity, invention, all this, I think, again, in relation to employment. If you're innovative, if you're creative, if you can do certain things, make the economics work, then I think, again, you are there. You'll probably be a good employer as compared to somebody else who are not creative in this particular sense. And eventually, I think all of us are pushed into this whole idea of high technology. Now we are talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution, and all the other revolutions behind us has given some perspective of what this is all about. So I want to use this word 3M as a kind of a model that we are into at the moment in time, simplistic as it is, but this is a kind of approach that we'll do. At the end of the day, we talk about, just like Dr. Nordin and James alluded to, it's all about money, it's all about economics, it's all about livelihood, it's all about living, then this will be the four M's that I would want to contextualize where we are now in the state of knowledge. Anything that is beyond this, we will not be so interested. So if you go into the human capital theory, at the end of the day, we talk about, education being an economics imperative. Anything, nothing to do with economy, therefore it is not given a priority, and hence the whole idea of values, which may not be economic related, will not be taken up the way it should be. So we often then label this as education without soul. Yeah, the wholeness of soul, the humility of soul that we referred to, I think is almost empty, because all of us are very externally trying to manifest things outside, and also to measure our success in the things that surrounds us, not something that within us, but anything that surrounds us, big car, big house, and everything else will be a quote unquote a mark of success. Although individually we'll probably be a hollow person, but that's not a question to be asked in the context of education today. So then we will then break it down into KPIs. I think Malaysia is noted for this, KPIs for everything else, you know. So anything that do not get measured, do not get done. And therefore values are sometimes pushed aside because oftentimes we do not know how to measure them. Morality, all the things that James had been talking about are not given a focus because there's no KPI attached to it. All the KPIs are basically, you know, the work of publication and all the things that we know too often about this, and later on leading to what we call today ranking, right? So this is a book, I think, instead of reading just the Fourth Industrial Revolution, it's a book called The Fourth Education Revolution, and that talks about the factory mass teaching methods, which is what we are undergoing, of the Third Revolution era have failed to conquer enduring problems of inequity and unfairness. And indeed, I think this is a problem that we face today. The disparity between the haves and the have-nots, the people who can good education and people who do not have education at all, I think basically is well exhibited now when we are facing the corona sort of pandemic, as it were. The disparity, the inequity, the unfairness, the injustice, I think very manifested very much. Yeah. So when we talk about this, then what do we need to put in mind? So I was thinking, therefore, we need to have at least some fundamental values. Yeah. The question of sympathy, the questions of empathy, the question of compassion. These are values that I think we need to integrate it with education in the context of values that I will explain to you a little bit. So the shift now, and I hope we can think about this, to talk about values-based education in a kind of way that it is integrated with values and also feelings and emotions and the effectiveness that James were referring to at the end of the lecture, right? So we need to move, and I'm suggesting that we need to look at if you want to use the term, as I said, the new normal, for us, the renewed normal. This was there before. How do you bring that into the existence of the system that we have now, as it were? So my thinking is basically we need to expand the horizon, the vista of what we understand as manpower, the individual and his own surrounding, to expand that into humanity. And this is where sympathy becomes an important thing. Unless I'm able to sympathize with other people around me, then my world will be just confined to my own self. The moment I sympathize with other people, then my world is bigger. Then I begin to take other people inclusively into my world. And education, I think, is one such arena that we want to invite these people in, based on the idea that, you know, this needs to be shared, and therefore sympathy becomes the first value. Now, I also want to advocate, rather than moving into just the mind, we talk about the heart. And instead of just talking about, you know, sympathy, we also want to empathize, meaning that we need to get out of our comfort zone. We need to go to the community. We need to soil our hand. We need to sweat it out. We need to learn from them so that we are part and parcel of that, you know, learning experience, what we call co-learning today, from the people that we are supposed to sympathize and empathize at the same time. So there is a kind of an integration, a kind of an engagement between us and the society around us, and meaning to say that university and society will be integrated in that particular sense. And last but not least, when you talk about high tech, there's also this idea of high touch. How do you bring compassion into it? And compassion, from my sense of meaning, is basically doing something without expecting returns. Oftentimes in the academic world, we do something we always expect for returns. You know, publishing, there's the returns for it, the credits, and all the things that I think is marked as though that we do this because of a different purpose, and the purpose often is a very shallow purpose. This is something when you talk about when you do something for a higher goal that we don't expect any returns, because it is part and parcel of the academic duty, part and parcel of education, that we need to be together with them and doing this because it is part of our vocation or professionalism, as it were. Yeah. Now, this is not new as far as IIUM is concerned. When I came here maybe 2 years ago, I see this, but in a different kind of a wording. When we talk about humanity, maybe they talk about internationalization, to look at the world in a kind of a integrated way, all right? We talk about integration in that particular sense, and this integration not only in the physical sense, but also in the spiritual sense. We have got here a faculty which I think is very unique, that would want to integrate revealed knowledge and human sciences. And how do you bring this together as a kind of a holistic knowledge beyond just what we understand between the two discrete sort of disciplines, as it were. And last but not least, they have got Islamization in the sense of trying to understand this from the perspective of Islam, the worldview of Islam, yeah, and how do Islam actually articulate some of these issues of being compassionate. I mean, Muslims always start with the word, the name of Allah, the merciful and the compassionate. Yeah, so compassion is very much part of us. But how do you realize it? Yeah, how do you make it work, and how do you make it as a way of life, moving away from this organizational hypocrisy? I really like that word, James. That it is real. It is not something that we pretend it exists, but within us it does not exist. How do you actually make this happen is the issues that I think that we are talking about. So in IIUM, that's always there. Maybe the articulation needs to be, deepened a little bit, but I see it resonates between what we are trying to do and what the university has inculcated maybe 35 years ago. So for that, then I think we need to move from the 3M to the 3H, right? And the 3H then will be able to handle what is tomorrow is all about. So in other words, now we move into this COVID world of tomorrow, something that we didn't plan, but something we must face with. And how do you do this? You begin to see now in the context of the COVID, you need to use some of these humanizing values, as it were. Suddenly the KPIs is not important anymore. Suddenly schools are closed. Universities are closed. Until now, we do not know how the university looks like in the future. Yeah, shopping malls are closed. Politics are also closed sometimes in certain areas. So the numbers that we talked about as quote unquote the anchor for moving forward is no longer that important at the end of the day. What it is important now is the value. And I will try to demonstrate when we try to understand is what sort of values we want to look as far as the COVID pandemic is concerned. How do you handle it without any numbers? Do not understand. The only numbers that we talk about, how many people died, yeah, how many people get affected. These are the only numbers that we got. But the rest, other than that, I think there is no sense of what these numbers means to us because the context and the values are really not well defined. Yeah? So in our sense, when we talk about values, immediately in early March, we try to understand what are the values that we need initially as a basic thing to fight the coronavirus, as it were. We use the word COVID. Yeah, first is cleanliness. Now, we have never been taught about cleanliness as far as I can remember in a formal way. Yeah, but now suddenly cleanliness is the key thing. And we are told how to wash our hands, what is soaps, what is sanitizers, and everything else now becomes the values that everybody needs to hold. Everybody now is very conscious about where they go. And we are now told to be compliant to certain SOP. No SOP means you cannot do something. You violate the SOP, you could be punished. And the whole idea of trying to be disciplined and being obedient is the other values that we need to hold to. Yeah, we become vigilant. Where we go to a certain place, do we need to wear face masks? What sort of distancing do we need to do? All these things becomes a part of an awareness. The values that I think we need to inculcate istiqamah, mean being consistent, yeah, and how do you do this in a consistent way? In other words, washing your hand, abiding by the standard operating procedures or the rules or the law, yeah, and be vigilant where you are so that you can take a good steps to avoid some of these things. And last but not least is how to be disciplined. All these things, I think some people have argued, if you can just abide by this, you can forget about the vaccine, as it were. You can defeat already the coronavirus just by attending to these values. And indeed, this is what the world is facing now. Many of the world, many countries now have overcome the whole idea of a coronavirus by flattening the curve, meaning following some of these values and these rules without even talking about vaccine, which probably will come maybe a year or two from now. But at the moment in time, these are the values that saves us. So I'm trying to make a case that with values alone, without the numbers per se, we can already do something quite substantial in trying to ensure where we are heading as far as the future is concerned. Now, taking from that, how do you move on to the post-corona world? Certainly, we want to get rid of the virus, and certainly it is not easy, but we can try and live with it in a way that we distance ourselves from the virus. In other words, get it out of the system. And for that, I think we need to look at education again. So the education without values, education without soul, I think needs to be changed into a value with soul. And where does the soul come from is a question that I'm trying to argue with you as far as the post-COVID sort of environment is concerned. One is about talking about how do you start balancing. Again, Dato' Nordin and James talk about balance is important. And we are not saying that the 3M or the 4M is not important. It is there, but we need to balance it somehow. Humanity must be balanced with the individuals. The mind must be balanced with the heart. Yeah, and high tech must be balanced with the high touch. How do you arrive at this balance is the issue that I think we need to discuss. How much of it that becomes a practical way of life as far as moving forward based on education. If you are talking about just money, livelihood now, we need to talk about life. I mean, here is a time when there is enough money. People who have got a lot of money, they cannot do much at the same time because there's nothing that they can do as far as the coronavirus is concerned. Normally, they go to developed countries to get themselves treated, but you go to some of the developed countries, you will get the same as you are getting at home. There's nothing that you can do with money. So how do you then appreciate life and make sure that life will be one of the major targets as far as this is concerned? Now, we want to introduce then what is the balance for KPI. The words I'm going to use is the key intangible performance, which is the KIP. The word intangibles, I think, is a key word here. We are not only talking about just the tangible, the measurable, but we need also to talk about the intangible, the spiritual, moral, ethical, has been mentioned earlier by James as such, right? And here, I think, James, we go back to tradition. In our tradition, there's this word Sejahtera, which is almost like the Japanese word of ikigai or Ubuntu in Africa, yeah, or lagom in Sweden. Every country, every nation, every community has got this traditional word that sees the balance are maintained. And we have got this word Sejahtera. We spoke about it, but I don't think many of us know what it means. Worst thing is how that it actually can help us in making our life better beyond just livelihood and making a living. How do you make life better? How do you make life more enduring? How do you make life more meaningful in the context of Sejahtera? And then again, there is something that I think we need to flatten the KPI so that the KIP can also be balanced with that. Yeah. At the end of the day, we want to talk about what we are talking today. We're talking about physical distancing. I would like to differentiate that. I hope people will understand it. Physical distancing and social distancing. Social distancing is quite different from social distancing, physical distancing. Yeah, we want to talk about social solidarity. So how can you put this together? Unless we get the terminology right, also we will not be able to teach people what to do. Yeah. So social solidarity plus physical distancing. How do you make this work and all the other values that comes to it so that at the end of the day, we can manifest as a community that has got values to be shared, values to make us work together, the whole idea of togetherness to fight this coronavirus or COVID-19 as it were. Now, this will be, I think, the kind of education that we will move forward, looking at in a more larger terms as again, James has alluded to, the sustainable development goal at the end of the day is all about balance. We talk about unsustainable world is a world that is out of balance. Bring sustainability to bring back the balance, and we crafted in the what we call education 2030, maybe 10 years from now. How do you then manifest a new kind of education that brings the values and also the economics at the same time in a very meaningful way. So in IIUM, we have changed the word, we call it humanizing education, meaning values education to a certain extent to bring the concept of values as part and parcel of education in a very practical way manifesting in the organization and individuals at the same time, which is a big task to do. So I will go back 2 years earlier when we think about this and how do you want to do this, and that's the kind of document we started with. We're realizing a distinctive. The word distinctive means exactly what we are talking about. How can we be distinctive in the sense that we can integrate these values together, becomes an organizational sort of standards that everybody will live by it, and in the sense leading the way. Yeah. So it is a leadership that talks about not of individuals but of the whole community, and hence we use the whole institution approach or the whole institution transformation. It's not a piecemeal anymore. It has to go right across the university, institutional wide, using the 4 elements that we profess in the university: Khalifah, Amanah, Iqra', and Rahmatan lil Alamin, casually translated as leadership, trustworthiness, knowledge or reflection, and also humanity. These are the 4 anchoring values that we want to do in trying to foster this change moving forward, and that's the roadmap that we have done. And in that, I think we will be having another book, inshallah, by tomorrow, and understanding what Sejahtera is all about, embedded in all these things, going back to tradition and making values alive in its own context of cultural dimension as far as Malaysia is concerned. I'll very quickly run through what we have done. So we have got these 6 strategic areas. We want to end up with a balanced graduate. In other words, the person that comes out from IIUM are really balanced graduate, and therefore they're employable. Yeah. Here we talk about and being employed, but sometimes they are not balanced. And we get all sorts of other problems within it, including corruptions and so on and so forth, because the graduates do not have the values that they should have as far as the balance is concerned. And this will move on. At the end of the day, they could be global in nature, and this is where the Rahmatan lil Alamin, they're integrated into the community of human beings, and they can identify themselves as part and parcel of that, community without the problems of ethnicity, religious boundaries, and so on and so forth. They are the person that actually can work over a global sort of environment and vista. This is the kind of humanizing education that we talked about. We talked about the maqasid, is basically the Sejahtera values that I talked to you, and sustainable development, right? From there, I think we moved on to the kind of focus that we need to work on. And I think this is where I would want to reckon the kind of leadership that we need to have. We need to have our institution ready at the moment in time. And I think this is a big question that we are asking in Malaysia, whether the university is actually prepared to move forward. Yeah. And from here alone, you can see you need to understand the educational philosophy of education, right? You need to understand what it means as far as values and balance is concerned. You need to understand what sustainable development is concerned. Now you need to understand what VUCA is all about, moving into the world which is uncertain, complex, and so on and so forth. And we need to understand our own core values as far as IUM is concerned. What do you mean by integration, Islamization, and internationalization? All this, I think, is something that we need to prepare, and we must be prepared before we can move on. Half of the time, I think we do not even understand what the university is all about. The university is still like a factory. The university is still talking about something which is so reductionistic. Yeah, we are still talking about things which is very siloed, and we are given KPIs that nobody even can appreciate because it's all top down. It's not bottom up. And this is the thing that I think net takes another form of leadership that move and say, we want a university of this kind, and you then work through it. And then you go into the organizational processes so that you can avoid this organizational hypocrisy, as it were, measures the outcome, and inshallah, going into the core of what we want, that to humanize education, as it were. Let me illustrate that what we are trying to do. The first thing that we need to do, therefore, is start to understand where is the strategy and what structures you know, what you have. Yeah. Again, in Malaysian context, the structures I think are archaic. Yeah, the structures are very much what you call one size fits all. All universities in Malaysia are the same. They have the same name also. I mean, the name is different, but the designation is the same. You have student affairs. Everybody talk about student affairs, you know. So we don't even have that flexibility of having that creativity that we talked about earlier. And I think it's going to be difficult. As far as university is concerned, IUM is concerned, we are already making some changes in terms of structures. We say communication is important. Not only communication is important to advocate. What is it that you want to advocate? In our case, the value-based system, the humanizing education. And this is advocated for change. It's not advocated because somebody else's KPI. We want to make the change because the change is important for us moving forward. And hence, this is what Liana can tell you better. Yeah, we use education, we use knowledge for change. Our change are all based on knowledge and education. It is not somebody else's fancy because we want to change. And it has to change for advancement. Sometimes you can change for regression. We want to move forward. Yeah. And this is before the coronavirus comes in. And finally, we have got another office for strategy and institutional change. I want to underline the word institutional change because this institution that we have got now coming from the Industrial Revolution is not meant for the change that we are going to face forward. So I'm really worried when you talk about the 4IR because it comes from the same model of the Industrial Revolution and nothing much we can do. Alhamdulillah, as we work through this, a month ago, we are given the status of the Regional Center for Expertise for Sustainable Development, recognized by United Nations. Now we are working with other communities at the same time. I think easily there are 20 other NGOs and communities working with us, integrating the university and the community at the same time and changing the concept of what the university is all about. This is what I meant by the institutional change. We are no longer that factory model, and I hope we will move away from the factory model, becomes a human-centric model, trying to move this agenda of humanizing education as well. Let me show you a little bit what we have done. So based on the set, what you call sustainable development goal, we now work on all the 17 goals. Yeah, you can see goal number 4, which is on education, goal number 7, which is on health, goal number 6, which is on poverty, and I think goal on number 8, which is about work. All these has been working. These are the major ones, but every of these goals are taken on and they are integrated with one another in trying to arrive at where we are trying to arrive. And I want to show you how do we do this. Yeah, humanizing education based on the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, based on that Sejahtera, the maqasid that we talked about, then we built the sustainable development goal around it. In other words, all the 17 can be summarized into the 6 things of wealth, faith, life, intelligence, and also lineage. Yeah, and more importantly, I think these are now well distributed among the faculty, the kuliah. There are sharing of platforms, and people are beginning to talk together. We are now moving into a dimension that is beyond just the silos that they were here for a long time. Breaking the mindset, breaking down the walls of knowledge so that people can actually be integrated and sharing the same value system. I think this is the important point as far as moving forward is concerned. Now, but then when we look this and analyze it from our own mission of the university, we find out when we talk about life, there are probably about 6 of these SDG. When you talk about intelligence, probably there are 5 of this. When you talk about lineage, there is 3, not too many. Wealth, maybe there's 5. Yeah. When we talk about faith, there's only 2. Because we are a faith-based university and the values arises from there. So I think there must be something that we need to do. And now we are working on what we call another sustainable development goal, which we would like to call SDG 18, which is about spirituality. And I think this is where James comes back and talk about, it's an exercise of putting spirituality across the board as part and parcel of the organizational sort of a mission and the organizational needs and wants at the same time. And this is where the 4 elements of the university comes in: the leadership, the trustworthiness, the knowledge, and also humanity. So this university is not about its own self, neither is about Malaysia. We are trying to craft it as a whole sort of a humanity, and how do you work through this as a kind of value system that everybody can share. My last 5 minutes, I just want to show you, after talking so much, how are we progressing, a little bit dated, but we see out of the 29 projects that we have arrived from all the other kulias, yeah, we find that there are various sort of progress, but some of them are now making good headway, all right? And the rest are treading along because all of us are learning how to do this. Changing mindset and changing work culture is not easy, but we are now trading along, and you can see how we work on that. Yeah. Just to also be mindful that there are different ways of tracking them. Some of them are tracked by numbers, some of them are not tracked by numbers. But at the end of the day, I would like to share you some of the very important news that we've got. Over the last 2 years, if we take this together in a very holistic way of looking at it, looking at just impact and outcome, not just numbers per se, you can see some of the achievements that I myself surprised that we can do in 2 years. For example, we have now reduced the number of carbon emissions within the university's project working together, and it's an equivalent of planting 260 trees. I mean, I cannot imagine we can plant 260 trees over 2 years, but here you are in an equivalent that we've done. So there is very substantial impact. There are very substantial outcomes. We're working together using the same value system, talking about how we can work together as a university of a different form, not a university that works like a factory. If it's a factory, I think we will worsen the whole thing. And this is what factory does normally. So I'd like to finish by sharing a kind of a good story. Yeah, we were listed by this Green Ground Award International, sponsored by UN and all the other international NGOs, education-based. Yeah, and on 2 things. One is we are listed as finalists on Sustainability Institution of the Year. Hopefully we will get that, yeah, and that will then demonstrate how this whole idea of changing institution works. And we also got another list as a finalist on a project by our Faculty of Architecture and Educational and Environmental Design. It's a student project benefiting the society. The 2 things that I'm trying to demonstrate with you. I would like to end up with when we do this, we take a different approach altogether. Yeah, we do not work in silos. We do not work competing with one another, and therefore ranking is out for us. Yeah. For example, I'm very sad to know now people are beginning to rank sustainable development, which go against the whole idea of working together, collaboratively, sharing knowledge. People are now beginning to run just for themselves rather than humanity per se. I think this is the basis of the problem. Yet we are now getting sucked into the same problem. What we want to do now is to work together, yeah, with other institutions, and this is why this seminar is a very important thing, and trying to understand again where the balance is. How can we balance with one country to another country? The country that has got so many things, how can they help us? The things that we learn, how can we help others at the same time? I think unless we go into that value-based principles and practices in trying to create a new institution with a new kind of a leadership, understanding the new kind of practices and the way of life, I think we will not going to make much headway as far as education and leadership is concerned. So on that note, I would like to thank you. Sorry if I take a little bit more of your time. I hope we can have a good discussion after this. Assalamualaikum, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Rick. I would like to echo one of the participants' comment that profound as always, but also, you know, I would like to take this opportunity also, since Professor Nordin is still here. Thank you for continuing to be with us, you know, for AKEPT to help influence the ministry, okay, for us to really push this forward. This is not besides this, because this is not for IUM, but for everybody actually, inshallah. Okay. To recap, Tan Sri Zul posited that the 4M, manpower, mind, machine, money, have to be balanced with the 4H, humanity, heart, high touch, and humanizing life, encapsulated in the term Sejahtera. Now, if we recall, James has previously mentioned that some of the external drivers of values education are ICT, economic change, and culture and sociocultural change. Three things that have been staring us in the face during this COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things that have actually been very in our face right now is that we all in the universities have to move to virtual learning environment. Okay, so one of the things that people have asked and have talked about over and over again is this question that how do we do this values education? How do we actually help our students? We're not just going to inform them about the values, but form these values in them through this forced virtual learning environment that we are facing now. Okay, which actually brings us, the next speaker is basically the best person to talk about this. Okay, so we have Professor Abdul Karim Alias to help shed some light about this. Okay, again, another speaker that does not require introduction, but otherwise, let me just briefly introduce Professor Dr. Abdul Karim Alias of USM, otherwise also known as the Sifu of e-learning and also now the micro-credential Sifu. Okay, currently he is the Director of Center for Development of Academic Excellence in USM and a strong believer of leveraging the internet for teaching and learning. Okay, the current pandemic and the ensuing move to change to online learning mode has not just brought the technical challenges to the forefront, but also the question of instilling these intangibles that we have been talking about, including these values in the education process. So with this, okay, I think we have the best speaker, as I have said previously, we have the best speaker to discuss this via his talk, Values-Based Education in Virtual Era, Issues and Challenges. Prof. Karim, I yield the screen to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lihana. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Very clear. Okay, let me share the screen first. Can you see the slide on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Dr. Lihana. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Selamat sejahtera and good morning, everyone. I'm actually not used to a serious intellectual discourse like this. Mine is always light and easy. Well, thank you for the honor to share my thought on this topic. It is really a great pleasure to be here. And I know why Dr. Zainal invited me for this session, because he knows that I'm a strong advocate of technology, and maybe he wanted me to share my perspective, my view on how do we infuse or how do we implement value-based education in the context of using technology or using online learning. So the title is Value-Based Education in Virtual Era, Issues and Challenges. And I've been in the virtual world for a long time, maybe more than 26 years. So I don't know whether I have a definite answers for this as how to implement value-added education using the technology or in the virtual era. But I would like to approach this topic from the practical point of view as a practitioner, very kind of down-to-earth kind of approach. Okay, I would like to begin with this quote attributed to Albert Einstein. Try not to become a man of success, rather become a man of value. Well, this is basic premise and the basic theme of our session this morning, I guess. I believe all of us are very much aware that we are living in the unprecedented technological development. It is perhaps no exaggeration to say that science and technology are exploding, but the wisdom is imploding. Perhaps it is shrinking. So we have heard from Tan Sri Zul and from our speaker James just now, the issues that we have with the values in our education system. So we can see that knowledge expanding, You can see there is an exabyte of information in the internet. And yet, when we look at the human or the human personality is shrinking. So because of the explosion of knowledge and implosion of wisdom, we find various kinds of grave aberrations, imbalance, and calamities. So it is here that we are compelled to rethink about our existing educational system. In Malaysia, we are proud that we have a good literacy rate, but when we look at our social, what about our social, cultural, and moral life? And this has been alluded to by by Tan Sri Zul and also by James. And we are witnessing day-to-day serious societal diseases, rampant corruptions, the rape, substance abuse, drunk driving, adultery, theft, child abuse, exploitation, murdering, and all other antisocial activities. And guess what? The main protagonists are the so-called educated people. So I like to share this another quote here. Man can fly in the sky like a bird spreading its wings and move easily at depth of ocean like a fish, but he's not able to live on earth like a man. It is very clear from this quote that the ultimate aim of education is nourishing, developing a socially acceptable and balanced personality or citizen for the nation and for the whole world, so to speak. We talk about the global citizen or the global citizenship. So here comes the importance of value education, which is inseparable from the broad concept of education. And I quote Dr. Nordin, I like his words. He was saying that education should be designed in such a way to develop for the man-making and character building program, training of body, mind, and soul. I love that. Thank you, Dato, for mentioning that. And as far as our education is concerned, we have our blueprint. And this concept of value-based education actually has been clearly articulated in the National Transformation Program, NTP, and in the Ministry of Education, has addressed these needs in our Malaysia education blueprint. And this has been basically aligned with the national philosophy of education, with the aim to create a moral society and education that gives children shared values and experiences by embracing diversity and an environment where every student will have ethics and spirituality. So the blueprint actually states that the outcome or impact of on Malaysian students from our education would be that they will have a strong moral values. So considering all this aspiration and the expected impact on Malaysian students, values education then certainly is one of the priorities in our education, Malaysia education blueprint. But the question is, how do we realize this, and how do we really translate that into our education system, into our curriculum design and delivery? And this is where we can leverage on whatever that we have at our disposal, including the technology. So this is basically the basic premise of my sharing and discussion. So with the clear vision and aspiration and a huge investment in developing our education system, including the investment to integrate technology and curriculum delivery. So we know very well that how much the government has invested in the BestariNet project and so on. One would think that our people will be more educated, right? But sad to say, what we are seeing now is more corruption, more greed, more selfishness, lack of integrity and sincerity. So the question is, what went wrong? So this is something that I think really we need to ponder upon and to probe as to what went wrong in our whole entire landscape of our education system, looking from the kindergarten up to the tertiary education, higher education as well. Right. And another quote here, which I like very much: when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. But how often do we try to fix the flower? How often do we expect the flower to grow, to change and thrive, to meet our standards, so-called our standards? How often do we neglect to fix the environment? And how do we characterize the environment in which the young generation is growing up now? I think these are very pertinent questions that we really need to ask ourselves as educators, as responsible educators, because we are part and parcel of the whole education system. Anything went wrong with the generation that we are educating, I think we need to take partly the blame, if not entirely, but I think we need to be responsible also and be answerable to this as well. So no doubt in my mind that value-based education is the need of the hour. But there are two questions that I would like us all to ponder upon. Over the centuries of our education, so we are now in the 21st century, this value-based education, is it not been given enough prominence in our curriculum? Although it is clearly stated in our Malaysia education blueprint, in our national education philosophy. So in the so-called virtual era, how do we leverage technology? That's another question that I want to ponder upon together with all of you. In the so-called virtual era, which is the title of my sharing this morning, how do we leverage technology and in supporting the value-based education? Well, this is a picture of me and my student. What I like to say here, ladies and gentlemen, let us meet the typical 21st century learner. They have been labeled by various labels. They are the Y generation, the Z generation, the Alpha generation, and they have been described or characterized as overwhelmed, distracted, impatient. And guess what? Technology in the form of internet connectivity and with the proliferation of social media have not been seen as a boon, but rather as a bane. And this is one point that I would like to maybe deliberate or to dwell on it a little bit. And as you can see, there are many articles in the press. For example, this one from New York Times here: online courses harming the students who need the most help. In the fully online model, a student may never be in the same room with the instructor. And this category is the main problem. It is where less proficient students tend to run into trouble. After all, taking a class without a teacher requires high levels of self-motivation, self-regulation, and organization. Now, let me ask these questions to the audience. How many of you actually have experienced firsthand, what it's like to take a course online? So you become a student in at least one online course, or preferably, a few online courses. And you really understand from the learner's point of view, from the student's point of view, what does it take to successfully, what does it take to become a student on the student side? And you really understand what it takes to successfully create, if you're a teacher, if you have experience to create an online course, you should be able by now understand the process and the challenges it takes to create a very good quality, successful online course. So how many of you have really created at least one online course or one massive open online course, MOOC, or even one, let's say, micro-credential module? So if your answer to this question, whether you have been taken a course online as a learner or whether you have created a course, an online course, if your answer to this both questions is no, then you might have some misconception about online learning and online education and how we can leverage this to design or to deliver part of so-called value-based education or value-based curriculum. And ladies and gentlemen, this is how I see from a practitioner point of view, how technology can really be used, can be leveraged as part of the delivering the curriculum that is value-based. And this is coming from someone that has been advocating and used technology in the form of online learning for more than 26 years. To me, the new technologies like AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and educational software are not just changing the field for students, they are shaking up the role of educators. They create philosophical shift in approaching teaching and remodeling, rethinking the whole way of doing teaching and facilitating learning. And I believe here we have great opportunity to leverage the power of technology, not to replace. So I want to emphasize this part, not to replace, but rather to supplement or to complement the traditional face-to-face education. So I would like to argue that one of the keys to integrate and use technology to infuse values seamlessly in the curriculum is by looking at this model where, to me, it boils down to the curriculum design and curriculum delivery. But for the curriculum to be delivered and executed well, we need other enablers in the entire academic ecosystem to work in sync. It cannot work in silo, or it cannot work in isolation. So in my humble opinion, we cannot look at the technology in a negative way. The culprit is not technology, but rather the systemic issues of the entire chain of our education landscape that remain to be addressed. So if we are able to integrate this cognitive, affective, psychomotor seamlessly, the keyword is seamlessly, as part of our curriculum design and delivery, I think we should be able to infuse, embed values in the whole curriculum delivery, and we can do it successfully. And very briefly, I think many of us know about the so-called six C's of education in the 21st century: the critical thinking, communication, work collaboratively. So this is where how we can design projects, assignment, activities where the students can work collaboratively and we can embed values as part of this, embrace culture, exchange respect, build community, develop creativity, and utilize connectivity. If we are able to integrate these 6 elements in our curriculum design and curriculum delivery, and be very clear as to what kind of values that you want to embed and deliver as part of that curriculum design, I think we should be able to leverage on the power of technology, the power of connectivity, and the devices that the students have in their hand in the form of smartphone to deliver value-based education. And very briefly, to me, in order to deliver value-based education by leveraging on the virtual environment, virtual learning environment and technology, we need our educators, our teachers, our academics, lecturers need to be well-trained and really understand how to create an innovative learning environment that would address these elements that you see on the screen here. I don't have much time to really deliberate on each one of these, but you can see here, for example, the element of collaborative, cooperative learning, experiential learning, authentic learning experience. All these are actually part and parcel of a good learning design, good instructional design, where we can really embed the range of values that we want to deliver and we want to inculcate, we want to nurture in our students. And I can, maybe I just skip here, this slide. I want to quote here, kind of example from my friend here, Professor Mushtaq. He's now the provost and CEO of Heriot Watt University, Malaysia. He actually one of the pioneer of MOOC, MOOC, Massive Open Online Course, when he was at Taylor University. And he successfully designed an online course, Global Entrepreneurship, involving about 3,000 students from around the globe, working together in a small group on the project, on the crowdfunding project. And he has published a research paper even on this success story. The title of the paper is Teaching Entrepreneurship Using Massive Open Online Course. And the results of his study suggest that MOOC is a suitable platform to teach entrepreneurship, as it provides tools to enable students collaborative learning, as well as to improve individuals' effective key entrepreneurial aspects, very difficult to pronounce, such as the opportunity to recognize each other's values, working together in a team, agree to agree, all those kind of values that actually part and parcel of the whole project that involve people working from different parts of the world. So to me, the success story of Prof. Mushtaq based on that MOOC is a good example to illustrate how we can leverage on the virtual learning environment to infuse values as part of education, as part of the curriculum design and delivery. And how much, sorry, excuse me. Sorry. All right. That's actually a volume of research being done on the aspect of human elements, actually, in online learning and teaching, especially the aspect of infusing the values in the curriculum, curriculum design and curriculum delivery. But the essence of this research findings boils down to the interpersonal relationship, the element, the human element, the social element in the whole learning environment. So interpersonal relationships are key to supporting the success of more students, whether it's face-to-face or online. And I come across the work or the article by David Thornburg, and in this article he articulates his philosophical views, and he basically says that he looked at social media, for example, as a platform where we can leverage social learning, and he crafted the metaphor of a digital social platform as campfires, the places where humans gather to socialize, to teach, and to connect with others. So to me, this so-called metaphor or the symbolism lends itself to a discussion of human nature, namely our desire for meaningful interaction. Because learning basically is social. It happens effectively in a social environment where people talk to each other, exchange ideas, argue, agree to agree, or agree to disagree. And it echoes the timeliness of human ritual and social organization, where people actually form a community and this community working together, helping each other. But the aim is, at the end of the day, is to be able to learn something new or to produce something useful for the community as a whole. So I like the idea that Thornburg, the way he looked at the whole thing, the social media platform that we have, that we can use as part of the virtual learning environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, the online learning is can be seen as a platform that we can use as part of the face-to-face learning environment. So this is where the blended learning can be utilized more effectively. And we can blend the synchronous and asynchronous modes together, where we can provide a good learning experience with the social tools that we have. And that's where we can get people to work together in a community and leverage on each other's strengths and helping each other for a common goal. And Tan Sri Zol mentioned about the humanizing education. And as part of that, when we talk about online learning, we can look at the online environment where we can put the elements of the human elements there. So this is what we call the humanizing online teaching or online learning to create a situation where strangers, because people can come from any part of the world, enroll in the course, and we can have a situation where strangers can meet, just like Thornburg said, meeting at the campfire during the dark of the night, but you have the fire that people sitting around chatting with each other and start to connect with each other. So the sense of community can actually be created. It depends on how good is the learning designer, the teacher or the lecturer in designing the whole online course or online delivery. So it's all about how we can build what we call social presence and community in the online environment in order to design, in order to kind of to cultivate the value system or the values that we want to deliver, we want to inculcate in our students through the learning process. And this, I have a few more slides on this one, but I just want to say something on this. In online, okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, maybe, yeah. All right, just a few more slides. This is what we call online community of inquiry, which basically integrating the element of social presence, which basically the part that we need to focus in order to leverage on the social interaction between the students and the community, apart from the cognitive presence and teaching presence as well. And the last two slides allow me to say a little bit more on social presence, but this basically we leverage again on the community, on the social interaction between students based on the activities that we can design that would promote interaction between the students and between the students and the teachers. And with this, we can get the students to develop and to practice certain values that we want them to have. And I just want to say that Penn State University have come up with a framework, and you can refer this online, where they incorporate the so-called community of inquiry framework, as well as the elements of humanizing online education in the online course, in their MOOC. And you can refer to this book that they have published, Humanizing Online Teaching and Learning. And finally, the conclusion here, I believe that yes, values-based education is the way forward, and the virtual or physical face-to-face, both modes is actually about integrating the human element, which is very, very important. And we need to leverage on the social presence when we design and deliver our online program in order to inculcate the values in our education. So with that, thank you very much. Sorry, I have exceeded the time a little bit. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Karim. We have a few minutes for Q&A. So I'd like to invite the first person who actually raised their hand just now. Okay, I think the question, one of the question, can the virtual system manage that this forming character thing into this situation post-COVID has been actually answered by the speakers. Okay, so but if I could go to Prof. Dr. Bimo from UPM, his question, how do we reset our higher education post-COVID? I think because if you see today, the QS ranking was released. So it seems that everything is business as usual. Today, everybody is talking about QS ranking. We still talk about KPI, nothing much has changed. So is resetting our higher education post-COVID just wishful thinking? Tan Sri? Tan Sri, if we could have you weigh in on that question?
All right, thank you for that question. I saw that Chang was putting it across the screen. It's a good question. It's a fantastic question. But basically, I think why do you want to reset education? Question to me is, are we doing education now? And it's a very fundamental question. Yeah, are we doing education? From my point of view, we are not doing education. We are doing anything but education. And the reason to me is very simple, because we're measuring all the wrong things that we need to measure. I mean, you mentioned about QS ranking, you mentioned about KPIs, and these are things that if you go back to the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, wasn't even mentioned. You know, the word modal insan wasn't even there in Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan. So I think we have taken this Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan for granted. And therefore, we are now reshaping education the way we understand it. And as I mentioned to you, and I tried to allude to you just now, the whole education system has been modeled on an industrial sort of relationship from the Industrial Revolution to 300 years ago. And we are now a factory. For my intents and purposes, we are a factory. At the end of the day, what we do is we want to give employment to our students, which is nothing wrong. Yeah, but the first thing is that do we produce a good human being? Because that is what the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, and that's why in our strategic thing, we want to produce a balanced student. Because Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan talk about we want to produce a balanced and harmonious student. And that is the first thing. Certainly when the students are balanced, harmonious, they are employable, they can do 101 things that we are expecting from an educated group. But this is not the case. And therefore, we need to reset. If you ask me how to reset, you go back to the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan. I mean, there's a good saying in Bahasa Melayu, kita sesat jalan, kita balik ke pangkal jalan. We are now, I think, lost. Ask anybody where are we heading now after post-COVID, I don't think anybody can give an answer. And what does the answer say? Go back and find out where you are. And then again, back to what James is saying, look at your tradition. What is tradition in terms of education? Where is the value? And this, I think, something that academics must do, something the university must do. I'm very impatient in the sense that our university is only just nodding their heads and not giving answers to the challenges they are facing them. I mean, we are training thousands of minds, and you cannot just squander those minds just because we refuse to say something that would annoy other people, perhaps. And I think that's the duty that we need to do and say, look, we need to change. And everybody is talking about change now except the university. The university is not talking about change at all. Everybody is talking about change. Where is the university? The university is for change. And that's why in my presentation to you, we are about change. We want to change for the better. And I think we have got the solution when we look at Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, you go in depth. Exactly like what Prof. Karim said, fix the environment, don't fix the flowers. The environment is what is university. Yeah, and that's why we are quite happy when we receive these regional centers of expertise for sustainable development. That was created in 2005 by the United Nations University rector at that particular time. When we look at sustainable development, we don't think the conventional university, the way it is organized now, can deliver sustainable development because it's a factory model. And therefore, the sustainable structure needs to be changed. And I think this is a discussion that we must have. This is a dialogue we must have. This is a thing that the ministry must get involved with. And I'm glad AKEPT is taking this lead because that's the only way forward. Otherwise, we will be lost again. And this time we will probably lose forever because it's difficult to fix something that's already in a state where it is now at the moment in time. I hope I've answered your question to a certain extent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri. And we are actually very blessed. Prof. Nutrin is still with us up until now. Okay, I have another, I'm going to raise another question from one of the participants. And this one, I think we're directing it to James. What should be the basis on values education? Is it religion or cultural or any other convention? James?
Oh, the $64,000 question. I don't think it's an either or. I think that we tend to say, for example, should it be based on secular, whatever that is, beliefs or religious beliefs or cultural. Religion permeates through, the so-called secular world very much. There's a controversial theorist who coined a term, political theology, and what his argument was that many of our so-called secular concepts or political concepts are really forms of secularized religion. What am I trying to say? I don't think it's an either or. I think most of our concepts of right and wrong, of what it is to be a good person, certainly in the culture that I'm from and even what I've seen in Malaysia, find their roots in religious antecedents or religious history, if you will, spiritual history. So I don't think that it's a kind of a contradiction. For my mind, I actually think that recognizing the importance of religion, the importance of the spiritual dimension, is something that brings important things to the table of our public debate. So I guess I don't see it as either or, that it's religion or culture or religion or this or that. I think religion is involved. The spiritual dimension is involved, whether people like it or not. And if I've understood the question, I therefore think that the setting up this kind of dichotomy or binary that we find in our culture, that there's a separation of religion from the public sphere, I think is a false binary. So it is the $64,000 question, but I actually think that religious values are extremely important. And secondly, I'll say this, that I think that given the way the world is going, the increasing conflict, the doubling down on contradictions, social contradictions, and social unease, I think that the religious traditions, certainly the ones that I've studied a little bit, and they're the Abrahamic traditions, offer us important guides to how to engage with the modern world. My view is, back in the day, there was the secularization thesis that modernity meant that religion would wither away. That whole argument. I actually think it's the opposite. I think that the contradictions of modernity, the terrible tensions, the terrible conflicts that we're facing now suggest not that religion is unimportant to our public institutions, to our public discussions, but actually suggests its centrality. I hope that makes sense. I hope I've interpreted the question correctly. But I do think that it's not a choice between. It's a choice of looking back into our traditions and looking back into our faith traditions particularly, but not only, and finding some ground for which we can have a more humane world, have a more just world, have a, you know, there's a famous Polish philosopher called Leszek Kolakowski, who was quoting, sort of paraphrasing Kierkegaard. Those of you who know your existential Danish philosophers will know who I'm talking about by bringing up Søren Kierkegaard. And he said, many of our arguments about the world, about material things, are actually arguments about God. They're actually arguments about ultimate things. And conversely, he said, many of our arguments about religion are actually arguments about the world. I'll leave you with that and that rather provocative quote, and simply say, I don't think it's either or, and A and B. I think that that our religious traditions are not less important in our current environment. Frankly speaking, they're more important.
Right. Thank you, James. I think this speaks to the balance that Tan Sri talked about previously, and also actually for us in IUM, that is, you know, something that we strive for. But this is just not just about our university, but about everybody else here. So yeah, this is something for us to continue to think about. If I could go to Prof. Karim, there is a question. I mean, it's not directly about e-learning, but I think it's something that in this time, especially during this time, you know, when children are not in school and are going through this virtual education at home. So a lot, this role played by parents. Okay, so we have this question. What is the role of parents in this transformative education paradigm? But perhaps we could look at it in this view that, you know, parents have to actually guide their children through all this, going through, especially the younger ones, as they navigate the virtual learning environment. Okay, for those who can, those who cannot. So these are some of the things, if you could briefly touch on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Liana. Well, I think nurturing our children, is when we look at it from a holistic point of view. Everyone in the environment, we look at the flower just now. The environment can be the air, can be the water, can be the soil. So we need enough fertilizers for the flower to grow. So if we use that metaphor, and especially when when we have our children at home, so the environment will be the home environment where the parents, of course, will be should be playing a very important role in guiding their children and to participate in the whole process, including guiding them through the learning process. So I guess the role of parent is of utmost importance here. But in the context of during the MCO, for example, where the students have to do the online learning, I mean, not all parents would have that skill and competency to help their children. I think it's just a matter of just if they cannot really use the technology, just be there around the children. That to me should be good enough to give them the motivation when they engage in the learning process. So yes, the role of parent is, to me, is of utmost importance.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Prof. We are running over time actually. Okay. But for those of you who have questions, I believe the speakers here are actually very happy to carry on to, you know, I know these people and they're very, very generous with the knowledge, you know, so you can, I think, also just get in touch with them. Okay. Seriously, they're very generous with the knowledge. That much I know. Okay. Now I would like to I think that with the be there thing that Prof. Karim used about, okay, I know James talked about let's not move to slogans, okay, but it's just something to perhaps wrap this up, whatever environment that we're talking about, the social presence, the being there, okay, with our students have to be something that perhaps something that we want to think about, not just in class, not just cognitively, but in behaviorally, effectively. So this is something with this, I would like to wrap this up, and I would like to thank everybody for being here, and I want to hand this over to the MC, Dr. Zaina. Thank you.
Dr. Lehana, thank you very much for wonderfully moderating the sessions. We would like to thank everyone, all the speakers, Tan Sri Zul, Dr. James, Prof. Karim, and of course the main funding, the organizer, AKEPT. There's no way for us to capture everything. To summarize, there's a lot of rich discussions happening. The only way is that if I can promote the next session, which we hope to bring these issues up to, if Prodin can help me to put up the next sessions, just to share to everyone for further information. It will take place on next Monday, but not at 9 a.m., but it will happen at 3 p.m. There's one speaker from Netherlands, Rob Ryman. Because of that, we've got to accommodate, and we have another speaker, Prof. Asma, and then also Prof. Basil from Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. So we really look forward for your participation for our next discussions, which will be the second, and there will be another one after that. Yeah. So hopefully everyone's enjoyed these sessions. The session is recorded. If you feel like listening to it again, watching it again, is available in the YouTube. So on behalf of the organization, we'd like to thank all the speakers from Nordin and all those who are present, who are around in the sessions. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We see you inshallah next Monday.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. No photo session. Karim, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Tan Sri. How are you?
Good. Maybe we can get a photo, and those who are still around, if you put your smiling face, and we'll capture the picture for our memory as well. Brodin, if you can put the whole screen, everyone's in. The gallery view, then you put the...
Yeah, okay.
So please hold your smile. You got it there. Okay, all right. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone. Assalamualaikum.
Wendy, Amy, tak tanya soalan lagi ni.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, James. Thank you, Prof. Karim. Thank you, Prof. Nordin. And thank you, Tan Sri Zul. Yeah.
Thank you.